call this meeting to order. Okay, let me just get my outline up so I stay on task. Okay, and is this working? Thanks everyone for coming out. Is it better if I hand hold this or? Yes. Yes, okay. It's a lot of things to maneuver here. Let's see if we can do it this way. I'll try to stay in front of it. Okay, thanks for coming out. I know it's rainy and everyone probably wants to stay in bed and do a little reading, but I appreciate you coming out and sharing this morning with me. I'm really happy to be here talking with you about native wildflowers and share some of the ones that you'll find here at Mead Garden. First, I want to just tell you a little bit about our organization. I guess I already advanced that. We are a nonprofit, statewide nonprofit organization, and our mission is to protect, connect, and expand native wildflower habitat throughout Florida. And we do that through education, research, planting, and conservation programs. Our efforts focus on recreating pathways or networks of habitat, especially in our urban and suburban areas. We want to reconnect our landscapes for pollinators, for plants, and for people. Excuse me one second. I'm going to need my water handy too because I just drank a lot of coffee. Thank you. So we offer grants. We offer grants to public entities, municipalities, public gardens, any public space that wants to provide or establish a native plant demonstration garden. We have grant funding for that we do every year through our Viva Florida program. We also have a Seedlings for Schools grant program, which ships wildflower seedlings to school campuses around the state so that they can establish a campus garden. We also provide curriculum and other resources so that teachers have all the tools they need to successfully grow the plants, but also get students engaged and teach them about the life cycles of plants and pollinators and the importance of native plants as well. And we're about to launch a library grant program too, which will again be a demonstration garden. We're all about showing the public what these native plants do, how they look, and how people can do them in their own landscapes. So we thought that libraries really offered a great opportunity. They attract such a diverse audience with different ethnicities, different socioeconomic backgrounds, genders, everything, a huge variety of people visit the library. So it's a good place for people to get exposed to these native plant gardens where they might otherwise not be exposed to them. So we'll be launching that next year. We also work with the Department of Transportation and counties and cities to help them manage roadsides for wildflowers. We don't do planting. Everyone thinks we're responsible for all the planting of wildflowers. That is the Department of Transportation for the most part. But what we do is survey roadsides and look for naturally occurring populations and then provide management plans to counties, public works departments, and DOT so that they can manage those naturally occurring populations more effectively for pollinators and for the beauty of our experience. We fund research on different topics that are related to native plant horticulture, pollinator-plant interaction. Right now we're conducting a study on site preparation so that we can start helping people manage for weeds before they even get plants in the ground. And of course we provide public education. I have some materials in the back that you're welcome to take home with you. We do events like this. We offer a monthly webinar, field trips as well to get people out into nature. The best way to learn about native plants is to go out and see them. And if you see what's growing around you and in a local environment, then that's going to give you a clue as to what's going to be best for your own landscape and feed our local native wildlife. So these are all the things that we do, or most of the things we do. I'm sure I'm forgetting some stuff. We are funded primarily by the state wildflower license plate. You can see down there the tiny one. I'm trying to phase that out. That's our old design. We've had it since 2000, but in 2018 we came up with a new design. There's still a few of the old ones on the road, so I don't want to get rid of it until they're gone. But we have brought in over $4 million since the license plate was founded because every person who purchases it and renews it, it's $15 that comes to us every year, which sounds like nothing, but we have over 30,000 cars on the road right now with this tag, one of those 2 tags. So we're very appreciative of that. If you have either of the tags or want to get either of the tags, you also will get a membership with our organization. So you just have to let us know that you have it, and we'll get you in our database. But those donations from the tag, along with other donations, memberships, are what support the work that we do and allow me to do presentations like today, what I'm going to talk about. So Florida is renowned for its unique natural beauty. We have so many different landscapes in here in Florida, so many different ecosystems, and you'll find wildflowers in all of them. From our coastal wetlands, our salt marshes, all of those lovely habitats that exist on our coastline, our temperate and hardwood forests, our pine flatwoods and sandhills, our prairies. We have a lot of freshwater lakes here too, and springs, many different springs. Of course, our beaches, we're famous for our beaches here in Florida. And my personal favorite, the pitcher plant bogs. We have so much extraordinary beauty here, and so many landscapes that I think are just nothing short of breathtaking. And when we see them, we are connected to them. They inspire us, they engage us. This is beautiful to us, and we want to immerse ourselves in it. Even our roadsides can be beautiful landscapes that afford us opportunities to connect with the natural world. I'm sure many of you have seen a beautiful blooming roadside and experienced the sight of these flowers along the road, especially on some of our more monotonous, boring drives. To have that burst of color and beauty come out is it makes us take a second look. It makes us go ooh and ah, and it even makes us slow down, which is something we need on a lot of our roadsides. But this state is a treasure trove of ecological wonders. We have over 3,200 native plants. We are one of the most biodiverse states in the country. We've got over 500, almost 600 threatened and endangered species, many endemic species. That means they occur nowhere else in the world but Florida. And 170 endemic wildflowers too. So among our native plants, our wildflowers are especially alluring, at least to me. I think to many of us though. Their beauty, their intricacies, their uniqueness, their colors, they're things that really, again, captivate our attention and our imagination. I like to think of wildflowers as kind of a gateway species, because that's what they were for me. I took a botany class in college, and being a Florida native, I was already interested in being outdoors and experiencing our natural environments, but I felt like I was surrounded by a sea of browns and greens, right? All of our grasses and shrubs and trees, and there's a lot of beauty there too, but it was the wildflowers that really got my attention, that beacon of color in that otherwise brown and green environment. I loved being immersed in nature, but I really looked for those little hints of color in an otherwise, at least for me back then, a kind of monochromatic background. I have a very different opinion of trees and shrubs now, but I think this is what it does for people. Those little beacons, and we're looking for those when we're hiking and when we're kayaking or when we're just out in nature. Whether we're conscious of it or not, we tend to be looking for the thing that's going to catch our eye. Where's that color? Where's something different in the landscape? And so when you see them, it calls to you, right? It tells you to come look closer. And when you start looking closer, that's when you start seeing the interconnectedness of everything. I'm not just looking at the color, but I'm looking at the flower form. I'm looking at the insects. What's eating it or living among it? How is it interacting with everything else around it? So that's why I think of them as a gateway, because that's the thing that's going to suck you in. But then when you start paying attention, you start noticing all the other components of the environment. Wildflowers are essential to our ecology, our economy, our health, our natural beauty. They're a very important part of our landscape and for us too. they add a lot to our environment, diversity to our landscapes. They provide opportunities for ecotourism and recreation. Wildflower tourism is a thing. People come from all over to see some of our roadsides, particularly in the Panhandle. But even our natural areas, the areas that are hotspots for wildflowers, people will come from all over to photograph them, to look at them, to see them. So it's a good opportunity for us, and it's economic, excuse me, that's economic opportunity too, because those people coming down to look at this stuff are also staying in our local hotels, eating in our local restaurants. So it's bringing business to our local cities and municipalities. Our wildflowers also perform what we call ecosystem services. They will filter out pollutants and bad things from our water and from our air. They will help with erosion control. Many of our wildflowers and grasses, I count my grasses in there too, which I'll show you some as we get into the species. But they have roots that are meant to hold our soils in place. So it's important that we have space for them, because erosion is a problem here in Florida with climate change and sea level rise and development. They help with carbon sequestration, climate regulation. I mean, plants are very important, and wildflowers serve those same functions. And of course, they're beautiful, right? They make us happy. They give us civic pride when they're in our home landscapes and our municipal landscapes. But most importantly, they are foundational to the food web. So they provide nectar and pollen for our pollinators, which is very important. I'll talk about that in a second. Those pollinators are then eaten by birds and other wildlife, which are then eaten by larger wildlife, so on and so forth throughout the web. They're also food themselves. Many of our wildflowers produce seeds or fruits that are eaten by wildlife, birds. Some of the flowers and stems and leaves are also food. So they are an important food source that are at the bottom. Well, our web is not a triangle anymore, a pyramid, but they are at the foundation, at the center of that food web. And you will find wildflowers in every ecosystem here in Florida. And with them, you will find an intricate web of pollinators as well. Bees, butterflies, other insects that are vitally important to our environment and to us. They are necessary for a healthy ecosystem. I just talked about how they're food. We know that they are food for many animals. Insect larvae in particular are very important for baby birds. Most baby birds can't process the foods that they will eat when they become adults. They need that soft, squishy larvae, caterpillars, and they need lots of them. So we need them as a food source. But pollinators also provide ecosystem services. They will help with decomposing materials. A lot of our beetles and ground-dwelling insects will help break down dying plant matter, animals as well. And they also can keep bad insects away. We have a lot of pest insects, but if you have the right beneficial insects in your landscape or your natural areas, then you're going to keep those bad ones away. But the most important service they provide is pollination. That is how most of our native plants reproduce, and that is how all of our agricultural crops reproduce, or at least most of our agricultural crops. Generally speaking, about every third bite of food you eat, pollination is necessary. So we have a lot of agricultural crops here in Florida, but our agricultural crops are not suited to provide all the nutrients and calories that our native pollinators need. So we need the native pollinators to make our food, but the food's not providing enough for them. So we have to have native plants, native wildflowers especially, nearby so they can keep getting what they need. The agricultural crops, a lot of times it's like, eating a bag of Fritos. Like, it tastes good, it fills you up, but you still gotta go home and eat those vegetables, right? That's kind of how it is with our native plants and our agricultural crops. But if we didn't have pollination, we wouldn't have all of these things and so much more. Chocolate and coffee, I can't live without it. You need pollinators for that. So we have to have food for these tiny creatures. These are kind of our unsung heroes, right? They do so much heavy lifting for us, so much necessary work, but they are facing challenges. Maybe you've seen the headlines, insect apocalypse. Oh, it sounds so scary and dramatic, and it is, but it's true. Insect decline is a real thing. It's a global issue. It's largely due to pesticide use. We don't like bugs, right? We get rid of insecticide. That's literally killing bugs. So we do a lot of that because it's not what we want as humans. But that's contributing to a demise. But the biggest thing that's contributing to it is habitat loss. And in Florida, this is particularly problematic. We are now the fastest growing state in the country. We have about 1,000 people a day moving here, which every time I give that statistic, my mind goes, 1,000 people a day are moving to Florida. So we have to accommodate for these people, right? We have to build roads and schools and shopping plazas, places to work, all of that. And we're doing that in our natural lands. We are developing our natural lands faster than, just fast, at an alarming rate. So those ecosystems we treasure, all the beautiful, unique landscapes that we have here, we're losing a lot of that to accommodate all of this growth. They're shrinking, they're becoming tiny little islands of habitat surrounded by these weird grids of human population. So places like Mead are really important because this is a little oasis in the middle of all this urban development. It has an abundance of native plants here. And that is becoming increasingly more important as we witness the decline of pollinators. This is a refuge for pollinators and other wildlife because Mead has provided habitat, protected habitat, and allowed for the addition of more native plants to help supplement our beleaguered pollinators' diets. So we can create these habitats in our home landscapes too. We're encouraging bees and birds and butterflies when we plant native plants. We're encouraging them to hang out there because there's food, there's habitat, there's shelter. And how fun is that to see? I moved from a condo to a house in 2018 and completely changed my landscape to natives. And it's amazing because my neighbors haven't done it, even though I'm trying to push for that. But a lot of people walk their dogs in my neighborhood and they come by and they say, oh my gosh, you have so many butterflies in your yard. Why don't I have them in mine? You don't have any native plants. You've got lawn, which doesn't serve any purpose. So if we add these plants to our home landscapes, again, we can create spaces for pollinators, but also create spaces for ourselves. It's so much more lush. My temperature in my yard is cooler than my neighbors because I have a lot of green. I have a lot of intentional shrubs and wildflowers and trees that are feeding my local animals, but also feeding my soul, essentially. I spend more time on my front porch than I ever thought I would imagine, or ever imagined I would do. So I'm going to get into the Mead plants shortly, but I just want to note why native plants are so important, more so than most of our typical landscape plants. Most of our common landscape plants are from Asia or South America. They are not from here, so they're not acclimated to the conditions that we have here in Florida. Florida's a little kind of a weird state in terms of our ecology. We experience droughts. We have a lot of salt and wind from our coast. We have crazy storms, hurricanes, and lots of rain sometimes. We have varied soils, lots of acidity. There's just a lot of different things in our landscapes. And so, if you happen to be from the Northeast or the Midwest and you're a gardener and you came here, it's very different here. But our native plants are acclimated to those conditions. And so because of that, they don't need a lot of chemicals to keep them healthy. They don't need as much water as a lot of our non-native species do too. And because they've evolved here with our local wildlife for millennia, they are better acclimated or better suited to provide food for our pollinators and for other wildlife. And of course, they perform those ecosystem services I mentioned, and they are part of our natural environment. If you are interested in, and of course I do have resources to help you, but if you're interested in learning more about native plants or buying native plants for your landscape, please check out plantrealflorida.org. They are our partner, the Florida Association of Native Nurseries. If you go to their website, you can find a map that has all of the nurseries that sell or specialize in natives around the state. You can also find landscape professionals and other people that are that know this stuff and can help you if you're interested in doing that. And if you want to purchase native seeds, wildflower seeds, the Florida Wildflower Seed Growers Cooperative is right now the only source. There are a couple people trying to make those available, but right now you can purchase directly from the cooperative at floridawildflowers.com. So on each of the plant slides that I'm going to show you, does this work? I've never used it. No, I don't think it does. Anyway, this little box on the left-hand side here, you're going to see that in the upper right-hand corner of each of the slides. This is just a little quick reference key on the information on the plant. So what's the color of the bloom? What season does it bloom in? Does it want sun, shade, partial, dry, moist, or wet soils? And what is its general growth habit? And this is a key that I use in the book. We use a very similar key in all of our publications too, because we want to make it easy for people, especially people who don't know about native plants or are just getting started. This is a quick guide to help you figure out what's going to work in your landscape. So you'll see that in the corner of each of my slides. So let's get into the fun part, the plants, right? This is hammock snakeroot. This one was added to, and so is everyone familiar with the different areas in the park and the native areas in particular? Over by the Discovery, is it still called the Discovery Barn? Over by the Discovery Barn, in front of it is a native garden. It's all native plants. It's very lush and beautiful. It's been there since before I started summer camp, so it's been there quite a while. There's also along the bike trail, so out in the open area over here where the picnic pavilion used to be, will be again as I understand it. In the far back along the trail, the local Native Plant Society chapter has been doing, we'll call it a restoration, but they've been trying to turn it back into what it once was. So this area would have naturally been sandhill, lots of longleaf pine, open ground, floor, what am I trying to say? An open environment with lots of wildflowers and grasses and some shrubs as well. So they have been restoring or returning a lot of the landscape back there to this type of environment. They have a mix of sandhill and scrubby flatwoods. And then along the creek and in the other kind of more wild areas of Mead, there's a mix of naturally occurring native plants and some other ones that have come in that kind of found their way into a lot of our landscapes. So I'm going to kind of tell you where to see these plants because they're going to be situated in different areas in the park. This one was added to the scrubby flatwoods, which is along the bike trail toward the south end of the park. I think all the plants I'm talking about are perennials. If there is an annual, I'll point it out, but I'm pretty sure they're all perennials. This one is a late summer to early winter bloomer, so it does have a pretty nice long bloom season. It attracts butterflies and hummingbirds, believe it or not, even though its flowers are very tiny. This is a member of the aster or daisy family, but the flowers lack those ray florets, the things that we think of as petals. So they just have these little, they're called disc florets, the little centerpieces of the flower. But they bloom profusely, so it kind of forms a little mound, and it's generally full of blooms, as you can see on this particular plant. It makes a nice low shrub border, but it also works well in a naturalistic planting or as a specimen plant. This is coastal plain honeycomb head. It is so named because that center of the flower, especially as it ages and the ray petals fall off, it starts to look like a honeycomb. This is another perennial late summer through early winter blooming, profuse bloomer and profuse seeder, so it will reseed readily in the landscape. It attracts butterflies. It also attracts hummingbirds. And it gets 2 to 3 feet tall. It's another one that also makes a nice kind of cluster plant or a specimen plant as well. It It likes dry, sandy soils, so it doesn't really tolerate a lot of moisture, although it can handle a little bit. But it's just, I think the yellow flowers in particular are just, I mean, maybe it's because they're the color of sun, but they're very sunny and happy to me. Although I was talking to someone yesterday who does landscape design, and she said, I have a client who said, I hate yellow flowers. And I thought, how does anyone hate yellow flowers? Yeah, different tastes for different people, right? But again, this one seeds a lot. So if you want it in your landscape and you have the right conditions for it, you just need to give it some bare ground. If you're mulching really heavily in your landscape, those plants that reproduce by seed, the seeds aren't going to hit the soil. The seed has to have contact with soil in order to give us new plants. So we recommend, if you do want to mulch, use something like pine straw that has space, kind of like pickup sticks. When you lay pine straw, they kind of lay over each other, but there's air in between or room for those seeds to fall in. If you're using pine bark or heavy mulch, then you're not going to get that reseeding to happen. This one is probably my favorite flower. This one you'll find in the sandhill and in the native garden. There's a nice clump of it planted right on the corner of the bike trail, that kind of the corner. This one blooms pretty much year-round, especially here in Central Florida, and as you get further south, it tends to bloom throughout the year, even though typically it's a spring and summer bloomer. But it's another one that produces a lot of flowers. It has a really thick tuberous root once it's established, so it's very drought tolerant. It does well in disturbed areas. But this one has a secret. When it's in full bloom, when the flower's fully open and those disc florets take on that kind of maroon color, it smells like chocolate. Sometimes you have to get down and stick your nose in it to smell it, but if you have a lot of them in your landscape, and I do, and they bloom at the same time, you can walk by and it's not a strong scent. It smells more like maybe a couple houses down, someone's making brownies. It's really nice though. But it's a great one for bees and butterflies. Again, that long bloom period and lots of blooms make it really desirable for the landscape. This is beautyberry. Beautyberry you'll find in the native garden. I think it's in the sandhill area too. And then it is occurring naturally in the park. This is a shrub, so it does get tall. And I know I'm taking liberties here with wildflowers, but I like to look at some of our flowering shrubs as well because they can provide beauty and interest in the landscape. And of course, they are very important to our wildlife. It does produce these tiny little pink flowers that small bees and butterflies like, but it's known for this just amazing amount of fruit that it produces, these beautiful bright magenta berries that birds and other wildlife eat. We can eat them too. They don't taste good off the tree or off the shrub, but they make a really nice jelly or syrup. You can eat them. They're kind of nondescript when you eat them right off the plant though. The leaves also have a really interesting quality that has been studied for the last few years. It contains a chemical that is thought to, or kind of known to, repel mosquitoes. So if you're hiking in the woods and you've got mosquitoes around, you can grab a leaf and kind of rub it on your skin, and it will emit that chemical. You don't feel it, you don't even smell it really, it's very subtle. I also kind of stick them around my shirt collar or up my shirt sleeves if I'm really getting attacked by mosquitoes. It's not like spraying yourself with off. It is not that kind of intense mosquito repellent, but it's a nice natural way to keep them at bay. If you do the leaf spreading thing, you gotta reapply pretty regularly, but I prefer it to off. But this one can get 3 to 6 or 8 feet tall. It can spread pretty well. You can prune it back if you want to encourage more growth. It does tolerate shade, but it's going to be leggier and not be as, not as dense foliage, and the flowering and fruiting will be less in the shade than if you can plant it in the sun. It can be deciduous too. Our deciduous and evergreen status of many of our plants is changing due to climate change. As it gets warmer here in Central Florida and moving north, we're in that temperate zone, or at least we used to be, where we kind of tended toward the South Florida responses of plants where things tended to be more evergreen, North Florida deciduous, but now we are seeing the impacts of the warming temperatures, and so our plants here are responding more like South Florida and end up being evergreen, which might be nice for our landscapes. We're still trying to understand what that means for our wildlife. This is vanilla leaf. It is one of several native carphiferous. Scientific names are a lot of fun if you want to get into plants, because it gives you little tongue twisters. Carphiferous odoratissimus. But its common name and its scientific name allude to the fact that it has a vanilla scent. The leaves in particular, as the plant ages, take on this vanilla smell, and when you crunch them up, you'll really get the sense of it. The leaves used to be used to flavor tobacco because of that vanilla part of it, but we have since learned that it's carcinogenic. So please don't smoke these if you have them in your landscape. But it does create a nice basal rosette of leaves, these long strappy leaves, and then the flower stalks will come up. In the fall is when it typically blooms, attracting butterflies and other pollinators. And you'll find it in moist to dry landscapes, full sun. It can tolerate a little bit of shade, but again, with any of the plants that are shade tolerant, most of them are going to be a little less performative in the shade than they are in the sun. The sun encourages the blooming, which of course encourages the fruiting as well, and the dense foliage. This is buttonbush. You'll find this along the creek and along the boardwalk over Lake Lillian. Is it still called that? I feel like I'm not sure what things are called here anymore. But the boardwalk, if you walk through the boardwalk, you will see some of this. This is another spring and summer blooming, and the blooms are very unique. They create these spiky balls, that is the flower you're looking at, that are very attractive to bees, butterflies, and moths. And the seeds are eaten by ducks and other birds as well. And if we had deer, the deer would be eating the leaves, but I don't think we have any deer coming through here. This one does get pretty tall, but it is a wetland plant. It does not grow in dry soils. It doesn't even really like moist soils. It likes to have its feet wet all the time, which is why you see it consistently in wetlands or along creek edges, places where it's not going to dry out. It does. It is one of the few that does really well in full shade, and that doesn't affect its flowering and fruiting as much as some of the other ones. So in the dense shade, it can still do pretty well. This is golden aster. You'll find this out in the south end along the bike trail in the scrubby flatwoods. Another long bloom season, spring through fall. Prolific flower, lots of blooms coming out. Butterflies and long-tongued bees in particular really enjoy this plant. But it's really nice because it forms these kind of little clumps, so the shape is compact. It will stay pretty compact. It doesn't spread like a lot of our wildflowers do, which makes it desirable for certain landscapes. And again, because it blooms so much and for so long, people like to have it in their landscapes. It does well in dry to moist soils. Again, full sun is preferred. Most of our yellow flowers you'll find really thrive in full sun. I mentioned earlier that we have a lot of endemic and endangered species in Florida. This is one of them. We have 2 species of false rosemary here in the park, in the native garden and in the scrubby flatwoods. One of them, the large flower form, is endemic and a threatened species here. It doesn't mean that you can't purchase it at a nursery. A lot of our endemics, or a lot of our threatened and endangered species are being propagated by native nurseries as well as for restoration purposes. But we're really lucky to have it here. It's part of the mint family, so it has a really nice aromatic quality to it. You can also use its leaves to make a tea, because it has like a lemony mint scent taste to it. But it's very attractive to bees, butterflies, moths. Lots of pollinators like it, and it's really a versatile ground cover because it does get woody, so sometimes it does take on a shrub-like quality, but it stays very low. So it still works in a wildflower garden or as a border or edge. as a specimen. It even does well in a pot as long as that pot is very well drained. This one does not tolerate a lot of excessive moisture, so that's why you find it naturally in scrub habitat or places with very, very dry, well-drained soils. Coral bean is, this is another shrub that produces a pretty stunning flower. It flowers in winter and spring, so kind of one of our either late or early bloomers, depending on how you look at it. But it has these spikes of very tubular red flowers, and that's really what hummingbirds are looking for. I know I've mentioned a few hummingbird plants that didn't have that, so they're not exclusive to these plants, but if you have plants with red tubular flowers, that is definitely going to be the most attractive to the hummingbirds. This is can be deciduous or evergreen. Again, as climate impacts us, we're seeing more evergreen coral beans. I have two in my landscape, one in my back, one in my front. One is deciduous, one is evergreen. Nature is weird. But this plant is incredibly drought tolerant, even though it can tolerate a little bit of moisture too. You often see it in hammocks or temperate forest. But it's pest resistant. It's just a really nice specimen plant for a landscape. You can use it to create kind of a hedge, but it's not one that really takes well to pruning and shaping. It's part of the bean family, so it produces these long seed pods. The seeds are toxic, so it's something to consider if you have pets or small children. Maybe not something you want to put in your landscape. And the plant is armed, so the branches and even the leaves have these tiny little prickles on them. So it is a nice one to plant somewhere where you want to deter anyone from accessing, because it's not very comfortable when you get tangled up in it. This is Garbaria. This is another endemic and threatened species in Florida, and you'll find this in the Sandhill area toward the south end of the park. It has a smaller bloom time. It blooms in fall, and it's pretty much limited to October and November. But it is a good one for bees and butterflies, and it has, kind of can't tell on this, but the foliage is really interesting. It has kind of a grayish green leaf, and it almost looks like it's dusted. So if you can incorporate it into your landscape, it really adds some texture and different color than a lot of our native plants. It gets about 3 to 5 feet tall, doesn't get much wider than a couple feet, 3 feet. And it doesn't require a lot of maintenance once it's established, if you put it in the right place. And I should have started with that. All of these are native to Florida, but it doesn't mean they're all going to do well in your Florida landscape. You have to pay attention to the conditions that the plants require and what your landscape offers, which is why we do these little quick keys to at least give you a basic information about it. This is one that you find naturally in scrub habitat, so if you've got moist soils or shade, this is not going to do well. I tried it in my yard. I was so excited, and it didn't do well at all. And then I felt really bad because I killed an endemic and threatened species. So this next one is firebush. It's all about trial and error, right? You have the hopes, you put in what you want, and then you start realizing what your landscape wants instead. This one you'll find in the native garden, and you will also find it scattered around the park naturally, although not as abundantly as in the native garden. In the native garden, it's gotten very big and full, and it's quite stunning. This is an evergreen plant that blooms year-round and fruits year-round and simultaneously, so it's a really good bang for your buck landscape plant. The fruits are edible to us. They do taste good, but only when they are perfectly ripe. They will turn a very dark, shiny, purplish black. They will look like they're plump and about to burst. If they start looking like a raisin, or they have any hint of green or red to them, you don't want to eat them. They won't hurt you, but they'll be really unpleasant. But a lot of our wildlife eat these fruit as well. And then our long-winged butterflies, zebra longwings and other long-winged butterflies really like the flowers, as well as hummingbirds. Bees as well. Lots of pollinators love this plant. It's a really easy plant to establish. It's pretty forgiving. It can handle full sun to full shade, dry to moist soils. Just a really nice one if you're just looking for that one, again, kind of bang for your buck, easy to incorporate plant. Blazing star you will find in the Sandhill area. So when I say Sandhill, it's really more of the southwest side of the park, as opposed to the scrubby flatwoods, which is coming in a little bit more as you're heading into the wetlands. They're all kind of blending together, and they're very similar. You have a lot of overlap in species. But this one in particular is in the Sandhill. It is a summer to fall bloomer. This is a good one if you have a small space, even though the plant that can get, when it's in bloom, up to 2 to 4 feet tall. It doesn't spread horizontally, so it's good for a small landscape. It's good for a pot as well. It's a very high nectar plant, so a lot of pollinators like it. Hummingbirds have even been known to nectar on it. I haven't seen any on mine, but still got my fingers crossed. And it does produce seeds that birds will eat too. But it requires little space. It's a nice one too because it Ooh. Oh, you okay? You okay?
Yeah, I'm just fine. I've learned on YouTube how to get up. Very well done. Sorry about that.
Oh no, as long as you're okay. So this will add vertical interest to your landscape because it does get tall and it has these long kind of wand-like spikes of flowers. It's nice to pair with some of our other fall blooming yellow species because that contrast of yellow and gold. People talk about not having seasonal color here in Florida, but I say our seasonal color is yellow and gold, or yellow and gold, that's the same, purple and gold, because we have a lot of fall blooming plants that are that bright yellow, gold color and these lovely purple flowers. So it really pairs nicely. It also works well with bunch grasses, and it just kind of adds a really nice kind of spark of color among a wildflower garden. This is coral honeysuckle. This is a vine, a flowering vine. It will flower throughout the year. It does produce fruits that our birds like to eat. Our hummingbirds obviously love these flowers. Again, that long red tubular flower. This is good if you have a trellis or a fence line, something to let it grow up. Otherwise, it just becomes kind of an unwieldy shrub. You can use it as a ground cover in a place where you don't want to walk, but know that once it starts kind of doing its thing on the ground, it's really hard to manage. I really encourage people to give it something to grow up on. But it's lovely. I love having things that will flower throughout the year. So also being able to provide resources for pollinators throughout the year. This one doesn't require a whole lot. I have it growing I have a homemade light pole that I just put a barrel with some concrete in the base, and it's only got about this much soil on top of it, but this is doing great. It's growing up the light pole, and it just doesn't need a whole lot once you get it established. This is spotted bee balm. I tried to capture the insects on. I don't know how well it shows up. This is another one of those bang for your buck plants that an incredible diversity of pollinators will utilize. Bees, butterflies, moths, wasps, flies. These are, and I know that wasps sound really bad, you don't want them, but they are effective pollinators. A lot of our wasps are solitary and aren't going to sting you unless you go after them. But this is a plant that flowers for a pretty long time. It can start in spring and even go into our fall. It is in the mint family, so it has a nice aromatic quality too. It contains thymol, which is the chemical found in thyme, if you're familiar with that herb. So it has kind of that kind of scent, or maybe oregano-like scent. But you can make a tea out of it. It has calming properties too, so kind of like a chamomile-ish tea, but it tastes nice, like a savory mint. But it produces a lot of flowers, and it produces a ton of seeds. So it is one that you either want to give space to or pay attention to it. And when it is going to seed, you can just cut off those seed heads and try to keep it in check. You can also hack it back, and it responds really well. This one you'll find in the native garden and in this, the Sandhill area. Muley grass, I did mention grasses are wildflowers. We do consider them because they do flower and they are herbaceous. Muley grass is not necessarily in any of the specific areas I've talked about, but you will find it in the park. There is some on the little pathway that leads to the native garden and the discovery barn. It's a really nice clumping grass that looks nice all year round. It has these dark needle-like leaves, so it is attractive in the landscape. But then in the fall, it just puts on this spectacular display, especially if you have it in mass, because it just looks like a purple haze on the landscape, and it's really quite stunning. It's very easy, adaptable to many landscapes, doesn't require a lot when it gets established, and it does provide excellent cover for wildlife. So we don't see a lot of things eating it necessarily, but those dense clumping grasses are great places for animals to hide or to seek shelter. And then those needle-like leaves are also good nesting material for a lot of birds and other animals. This is another one that you'll find kind of throughout the park, and you might even have it in your home landscape if you have St. Augustine grass. It's one that does tend to creep in. It's frog fruit. It's a larval host for the common buckeye, the white peacock, Phaon crescent, which is pictured here. But it's a really nice one, especially if you're trying to replace your turf, because this is mat-forming, low-growing. It spreads by underground rhizomes, so it will fill in really nicely as a ground cover. You can mow it, and it will come right back. Don't mow it below 5 to 6 inches. If you cut it back too far, it's going to kill it. But at about 5 or 6 inches, it will respond favorably, and it will encourage it to bloom more. But it's evergreen. It blooms winter and spring, but I've seen it blooming throughout the year here in Central Florida. But its flowers are teeny tiny, so mostly you'll see very small pollinators on it, but it does attract small bees and butterflies as well. And it's one that you can put into a pot or a hanging basket because it has that kind of rhizomatous or trailing growth habit. If you put it in a hanging basket, it will drape over really nicely, and it's quite nice. This is wild pennyroyal, another member of the mint family that you can eat or make a tea out of. This is nearly endemic. It occurs in a couple of places out in Georgia, but otherwise it's only found in Florida. This was planted in the scrubby flatwoods. It has an early bloom period. So paying attention to bloom periods is important for 2 reasons. One, you want something pretty all the time in your landscape, so you pick plants that are blooming throughout the year. But you also want to provide resources to our pollinators throughout the year. So it's important to think about, if you're really trying to create habitat in your landscape, picking plants that have different bloom times. And here, especially in winter, there's not a whole lot blooming. So finding those year-round bloomers or the ones that do bloom in early times is important to consider. It's very aromatic in the landscape. It likes very dry, sandy soils. In full sun. Again, this is one that occurs naturally in our scrub and our sandhill areas, so it doesn't tolerate a lot of moisture once it's established. Narrowleaf silkgrass is also in the sandhill area. Excuse me. Another late fall to early winter bloomer, but it has a silvery foliage, which gives it its common name. And that is not evergreen, ever silver. So it's another kind of interesting addition to a landscape because it has that different color and texture of foliage. And it's also, we've been studying it for a few years now as an alternative ground cover, particularly on roadsides where bahia grass and other grasses that are just ecologic dead zones are being managed by our departments of transportation. So we're looking at this and a salvia species as a potential ground cover because it can be mowed, it spreads pretty easily by underground rhizomes, and it has an interesting look to it. So it will be something appealing as well as providing food for butterflies and other pollinators. Pickerel weed is found along the creek and in Lake Lillian, so naturally occurring here. It's another wetland species. It likes to have its feet wet all the time, so don't plant this in a dry landscape. You can put it in a water garden, or if you have a pot that stays consistently wet, it will do okay in that. It does have edible seeds, but you really have to work to get to them. They're kind of buried deep down in there. But it does bloom spring through fall, heaviest in spring typically, but you will see a lot of them blooming throughout the summer and fall. It does flower best in full sun, even though it can tolerate some shade. Again, that's kind of standard with a lot of our shade-tolerant plants. Wild coffee is in our natural area, or excuse me, our native garden. You'll also find it sporadically in the rest of the park. It does have an edible fruit. It is related to the coffee that you drink, but it is not. This has no caffeine in it. You can roast it and make a coffee-like drink out of it. But it doesn't taste like the coffee that we know, and it doesn't give you that kick that we're used to either. But it does produce these little white flowers that are very attractive to bees. Small wildlife will also eat the fruit. It's another nice, low-maintenance, evergreen plant that does great in the landscape, doesn't need a lot of maintenance once established. The dark, shiny, kind of textured leaves also give interest in the landscape, so something that if you're looking to kind of create that texture or some different experiences, looking for plants that have those different qualities is helpful. But it doesn't, once it's established, it doesn't require much. You can use it as a specimen or an accent plant, and you can also plant them in mass to create kind of a low border. Although I think the ones we have here in the native garden have also gotten very tall. Wild petunia is also in the native garden, and probably throughout the garden too. It's one that you do find kind of popping up everywhere. It has a seed strategy of projecting its seed from the plant, and it has an audible sound to it. If you're lucky enough to be there when it happens, it's kind of cool. I've only had that happen once, and it was here. But it does shoot its seeds far away from the mother plant, so that's why you see it kind of, even if you plant it in one spot, you'll see it growing further away. It's a great ground cover, can tolerate full sun to dense shade, but you get the best flowering in more sunny environments. The flowers are ephemeral, they'll close by the end of the day, but there's usually a lot of blooms coming behind it, so it's a nice kind of profuse bloomer. And it's a larval host too for, I think, the common buckeye. Do not confuse it with the Mexican petunia. This is invasive. This is everywhere. It is in so many home landscapes. You can go to your big box garden centers and buy it with no information saying it's invasive, but it is invasive. It's getting into our natural areas. If someone tries to sell you a sterile variety of it, tell them no, because this thing spreads by underground rhizomes. If you have it in your landscape and you want to remove it, you've got to get every single piece of this plant out. If you leave a little spot behind, it will regenerate. It grows vegetatively. It's a very difficult plant and something that we shouldn't be buying, but again, people love it, you see it, it's very easy to grow, so try not to purchase this. Please, if you have it, consider removing it. It is taller than the native petunia, so it's not really a one-for-one swap. There are other natives that will give you the same aesthetic if you're looking for that without being invasive. This is tropical sage, which is in our native garden. It's another one that seeds really heavily, so it probably will be spreading around. I have some in my landscape. They come up everywhere, in between my pavers, all over the place. I end up pulling them, potting them, and giving them away as starter kits for your new native garden, which has been effective sometimes. Some people are like, don't push your stuff on me. But it's a really easy to grow plant. Again, it's supposed to bloom spring or summer and fall, but mine bloom year-round. You can cut them back after they flower, and that'll encourage them to kind of thicken up and flower even more. It's a great pollinator plant, butterflies, bees, hummingbirds. There is a white variety and a pink variety too. They are native. They're just cultivars that have naturally occurred. This is saw palmetto. This is something that a lot of people would not consider a wildflower, and it's definitely not herbaceous. It's very more shrubby, but it's really probably the most amazing plant we have in Florida. And you will see this in the native garden. You'll see this in the scrubby flatwoods as well. This plant has been documented to be used by over 300 species of pollinators and other animals. It's extremely valuable to hundreds of birds, mammals, other wildlife, insects. It's a major source of nectar for for honeybees, which is a burgeoning agricultural crop here in Florida. As our citrus industry has declined, we're seeing more people keeping bees and producing honey. This is one of the top 3 nectar sources for honeybees. Citrus is one, and again, we know citrus is in decline. And Spanish needles, which is the little white daisy with the yellow center that everyone calls a weed, but is actually a native species as well. Those are the top 3 sources of nectar for honey production. So very important. The fruit is edible to us. It does kind of taste unpleasant, but with most of our fruits, if you add sugar and make it into a jelly or a syrup, it becomes quite palatable. It does bloom in the spring, and it produces these big plumes of very sweet scented white flowers, which they almost have a little stickiness to them, but they're just gorgeous and so sweet smelling. It's very slow growing, can handle a variety of conditions. It's a great specimen plant, an accent plant, or you can group it to form like a low buffer. It does have teeth along the leaf stalk, hence the name saw palmetto. So you do want to be careful handling it, but it's another good one to put in an area where you're trying to deter foot traffic. Again, no one wants to walk through it because you'll get cut up. I'm almost done here. I don't know where I'm at on time, so if I need to cut it, let me know. This is goldenrod. Oops. This one you'll find in the scrubby flatwoods too. Goldenrod's oftenly mistaken as being an allergy trigger, but its pollen is sticky. It's not wind dispersed, so it actually is not an allergen, but it grows at the same time and in the same habitat as ragweed. Ragweed, everyone knows ragweed is a huge allergen, and ragweed's flowers are green, so you don't really see ragweed. You don't notice that it's blooming, especially when you see it or when it's growing among goldenrod. If you're walking through a field where these two are coexisting and you're starting to sneeze, you're probably going to assume it's this, but it's really probably the ragweed. But this is a really attractive plant for a lot of pollinators, a lot of bees, other insects, butterflies, and because it attracts so many insects, it also attracts birds that are eating insects. And it does produce seeds that are eaten by birds as well. But it blooms summer through fall. It can be an annual sometimes, but again, in most of our Central Florida landscapes, it is a perennial. And we have a few different ones. This is Chapman's goldenrod, but we have a few different species. So seaside goldenrod can get up to 6 feet tall. This one's a little bit lower growing. And the flower forms are a little bit different, but very similar, these kind of wand-like yellow flowers. Lopsided Indian grass has also been planted in the scrubby flatwoods. This is a late summer to fall bloom. It is a nice grass when it's not in bloom, but it really puts on a show in the fall, especially when it's planted in mass. It's called lopsided Indian grass because the flowers or the seeds only grow on one side of the stalk. A lot of our grasses will put up a flower stalk and the flowers, will come out on either side. This one only forms on one side, and it tends to make the flower head kind of lean over a little bit. But that yellow and maroon color, when you've got quite a few of them in bloom at the same time and the sun hits it at the right, it's just truly spectacular. It is a larval host for several skipper butterflies too, and the birds will eat these seeds. And even though it does get pretty tall, it's got some openness to it, so you can put it in the landscape and it's not going to obscure everything. It's not going to block things out. It really is a nice addition to other bunch grasses or to a wildflower garden or mixed meadow as well. Porterweed is in the native garden. This is a low-growing kind of ground cover. It gets about a foot tall or so. It typically blooms in the summer, but it can bloom year-round. Mine does in my landscape. It's a larval host for the tropical buckeye, but very attractive to our Gulf fritillary butterflies too. The flowers are edible, and they taste kind of like a vanilla mushroom, which probably sounds gross, but it's kind of nice. I like to put it on a big sweet potato. I'll take a few of the flowers, and the color contrast with the purple and the orange is really nice, attractive on the plate, and then it adds a kind of a nice earthy sweetness to the dish as well. There is an invasive species of porterweed that looks very similar, but it grows tall and upright. So if you see this and it's low growing, good to go. It's native, it's what we want. The tall upright ones are invasive, and I'll ask you to take it out. Replace it with this or something else if you're looking for that, that kind of tall aesthetic. Spiderwort's one that is found in the native garden, but also naturally occurring throughout. It's one of those ones that pops up in our landscape without planting it. It's another one with ephemeral blooms that close at the end of the day, but it's a profuse bloomer, lots of flowers coming back from this plant. The flowers are edible. The whole plant is edible, actually. The leaves can be sauteed, eaten raw. The flowers can be eaten raw or candied. They make a nice candied flower because of that openness to them. But this one doesn't require a whole lot. It's really attractive to bees. It spreads readily, so it's best used in kind of a less formal landscape unless you want to try and keep it together. But it does make a nice border planting too. But this is one that you'll see, again, kind of throughout as well as in the native garden. 2 more plants. Blueberries are in the sandhill and scrubby flatwoods. We have 2 different species. Shiny blueberry has shiny leaves. Darrow's blueberry has a more muted leaf, but they both produce these clusters of little bell or urn-shaped flowers. And of course, they produce delicious edible fruit, one of our few natives that's actually very tasty off the vine or off the plant. And bees, other pollinators like the flowers, and lots of wildlife will eat the fruit as well. They grow only a couple feet tall at best, so they form nice little low borders or just kind of a pretty colorful mass planting. The leaves usually have a red and a bluish hue to it, so nice color contrast in the landscape as well. And they do spread by underground rhizomes, so you can establish a colony if you want to allow that to happen. And finally, we have Adam's needle. This is in the scrubby flatwoods too. These flowers are particularly attractive to hummingbirds, butterflies, and moths. It's a larval host for a few different moth species. It has a really interesting ground cover. On the right is what it looks like throughout the year, but then it sends up a really tall flower spike with these pretty large, couple inches long, bell-shaped white flowers that are just, again, nice interest in your landscape, something different than the other flowers that we have talked about. The leaves do have kind of a sharpness to them, so something to be aware of. So these are just a sample of the native plants. There's a lot more out there, especially in the areas where the Native Plant Society has done that restoration, but even just occurring naturally throughout the park. There are a lot of other native species that I could talk all day about them. But these are also plants that you can easily add to your landscape, which is my MO for talking about them. It's important to remember when we're choosing plants for our home landscapes that we shouldn't just be thinking about what's pretty. Yes, we can pick plants that we find aesthetically pleasing, but we want to think about the ones that provide habitat, or if they provide food or shelter, nectar, pollen, anything that we can help to support our pollinators. Because again, with all the development that's happening, we're losing the habitat that they need, and we need them to survive. If you need help getting started, we have a ton of resources on our website. I do have copies of 20 Easy Wildflowers here today, as well as our Attracting series that you're welcome to take home with you. We have other handouts that are also available on our website to download: how to create a pollinator pot, choosing plants for your aquatic landscape, your shady landscape, and others. And of course, I do have a copy of the book. I wrote Native Plants for Florida Gardens with Nancy Bissett, who is an ecological restorationist. She's a botanist and biologist. She also owns a native plant nursery. And we talked with nurseries throughout the state we had to narrow it down to 100 species, but we wanted to make sure that the plants we picked were plants that were easy to grow, that were easy to be maintained, but that were also readily available. Because I can talk till I'm blue in the face about all the amazing 3,200 native plants here in Florida, but if I get you excited about something and you can't find it anywhere, then what is that? If you're trying to add to your landscape, you want to make sure that these are plants you can find. So we've got 100 wildflowers, grasses, shrubs, trees, and vines that are available at native nurseries. And again, all the information that you need to know to add them to your landscape and to take care of them. I just want to say that, it doesn't matter if you only have a small yard or a patio. Every little bit helps. Even the smallest garden can provide food and shelter for wildlife. So if all you can do is plant a few pots of wildflowers, then do it. The wildflowers, the pollinators will find you. And if you do have a proper yard, think about adding some of these plants or maybe some other plants into your landscape to provide or bring back the habitat that our pollinators need. But whatever you have, whatever you can do, it matters. So I hope this has inspired you to maybe do some of this in your landscape, or if nothing else, get out in this park and see the amazing habitats that we have here and the plants that are just really spectacular. Thank you. I'm happy to answer questions. I also just saw what time it is, so I'm sorry if I was a little bit long here. Yes?
Are there any plants, wildflowers that are recognized when you see the big plant shows, etc., like the Philadelphia Flower Show or something? Are any of them recognized that you know of?
I don't know offhand. There are plants that are native here that are native elsewhere. And there are a lot of them that are cultivated for their flowers, particularly the larger flower ones, I think. But I haven't attended any flower shows to know if.
I didn't know if they recognized wildflowers or not.
I'm not sure. Having not been to, I think the only flower show I ever went to was the camellia show here. And the camellias are lovely, but they're not native or wildflowers.
Thank you.
Yes?
Do you know if buttonbush might work well in a pot to keep it moist?
As long as you can keep it moist, I would say that it does have a large growth habit, so you want a big pot. What I do for wetland, or what I recommend for wetland species, is to line the pot with plastic, or just get a pot that doesn't have any drain holes in it, and that will at least keep that moisture in there. But yeah, it's going to want to grow. So either be aware that you might have to upgrade your pot or start it in something larger. Yes?
Do you have any suggestions for what would attract bumblebees?
A lot of the plants I featured will. The blueberries in particular are really attractive to bumblebees. The mint ones, the conradina, what is the common name? The false rosemary and the wild pennyroyal too. Bees are most attracted to white, yellow, and blue flowers. That's the color spectrum that they see. They will go to red flowers, but if you have yellow, blue, or white, they are really most attracted to that. Yes?
Is it the coreopsis or the cosmos that's the state flower?
The coreopsis.
And is it considered a wildflower?
Yes. Yeah, and there are, I think, 14 species of coreopsis. So our state wildflower is a lot of wildflowers. But on the license plate is the Leavenworth's, is the yellow one, and then the pink one is the swamp coreopsis. And that only occurs in the panhandle, but it's the only pink one we have. And it does look a lot like cosmos. Do you have another question?
I have one more.
Yes, please.
I was just wondering if there is some sort of general rule for figuring out like pH ranges, for example, our grass is sort of a certain pH versus flowers, because I feel like I'm looking up every single one to figure out their pH, and I don't know if there's like a general guideline.
So there are plants that, there are plants that prefer acidic soils. Blueberries are one of those. They like it acidic. I don't do a lot of testing in my own soils in terms of pH, but what I do know is that I have a lot of oak. I have a couple oaks in my yard, and they drop a lot of leaf litter. Oaks and pine are tannic, and they have that tannic acid, so they are going to add acidity to your landscape. Whereas if you have an open environment, or you have different tree species, you might have a more alkaline situation. You can have your soil tested by the local IFAS extension, but I'm not suggesting it's not a good idea. I think it's good to know your soils, but I think what's more important is to understand everything else that's impacting it, and then what is the actual makeup of the soil. My soil is, what I've learned is it's hydrophobic. So when I pour water on my newly planted plants, the water sits on the surface, which is, I didn't know this the first go around of planting my landscape, and I lost a lot of plants as a result because the water wasn't penetrating to the roots. So I now add play sand, like you can buy the bags of just the very fine sand, and what that does is create airspace in and around the plants, and it allows the soil to penetrate better, and I've been much more successful doing that. So understanding that I do have things that are adding acidity. My blueberries are doing really well because I have the tannic environment from the oaks, but understanding the soil itself is really most important, because a lot of these have some variation. Some of the plants are specific and need a good acid or base environment, but most of them can handle a variety as long as they're getting the drainage that they need and obviously exposure. Yes?
We have a sloping backyard. Do you recommend any particular plants for quite a steep slope?
Grasses are good if you want that aesthetic. Grasses are going to hold the soils in place. My landscape is it's a slow slope, but especially down toward the road, I just have runoff of sand constantly into the road, and so we've packed it with grasses. But we also use mimosa, and I didn't include that one today, but sunshine mimosa is a ground cover. It has these little pink puffball flowers that are really cute, kind of feather-like leaves, but it spreads by rhizomes too, and it puts down some pretty dense roots, and it will...
Is it grass, did you say?
Mimosa, no, it's a ground cover. So it's low growing, and it's one that you can mow too, again, not more than 6 inches. So if you need to mow it, it'll come back, but it will really stake its roots in and hold onto those soils. Any of the ones that are that spread by underground runners tend to drop deeper roots. The frog fruit that I mentioned too, with the tiny little flower, that one will do well, but it does like it a little bit more moist, whereas the grasses and the mimosa are a little more forgiving of the dryness.
Any grasses will do on a hill? Any of the grasses that we saw?
Yeah, and there's others too. That we have quite a few native grasses that will really do well and help keep the soils in place.
I had another question. You said that the lady that you work with has her own native plant nursery. Where is that?
Yeah, it's in Davenport, so a little southwest of here.
Do you know what it's called?
It's called The Natives, and it is by appointment only, so you do have to contact them. But if you're interested, the nursery that I use is Green Isle Gardens. They are in Groveland. They are a huge nursery, incredibly knowledgeable, and have just an amazing assortment of native plants. I highly recommend going there. I just went on Friday and stocked up on a whole bunch of new plants for my landscape.
Well, we live in Claremont, so it's right next to
Oh, yes, very convenient. Yes, ma'am.
The coral funnel honeysuckle tends to get a little bit woody. Is there some recommended pruning to help address that, or is it just...
You can prune it. It will respond to that. It does get woody, and yeah, over time it's going to get, especially at the base, it's going to get a really big woody base to it. But you can prune it. I don't think it's going to take away from what happens at the base, but it will kind of keep that vine in check if you're trying to keep it a little bit looser and more herbaceous. Any other questions? What? Yes, Valerie.
I just recently bought a blueberry at Biodiversity Day. I'm getting ready to plant her. My soil air is real sandy. Do you think that'll still be okay?
It should be okay, but if you wanted to add a little bit of compost to it, I don't really generally recommend fertilizers because native plants shouldn't need them if you're planting them in the right place, and the fertilizers are not good for our waters anyway. But you can get a little bit of mushroom compost can help get it started, or a natural compost. You could try that, but they do respond in disturbed areas, so that the dry soils, just water it in until it gets established. Even our drought tolerant and our very dry loving plants need water to get established. Once they're established, then you can let them go. Well, thank you all for coming out today in this rain. I appreciate it.
So the slide had the website for